Hey Mike, how's it going? Give me a thumbs up or something if you can hear me. Hey Nick, just promoted you to panelist. All right, let me make you a host. See some folks signing in. Nick, how's it going?
Oh, it's going. I'm living my best life because I socially distance myself. Anyway.
All right, this is not the new normal for you. This is just the normal.
Yeah, this is about the same as the last 5 years.
All right, my OCD is going to kill me. I got to fix the thing that's falling off the wall behind me.
Yep. What I'm going to do in the meantime, I'm going to share this in the group while I'm a host. May as well.
Cool.
Christian Pennington. I forget the Seth has like an actual real name.
It takes a moment.
Drop a comment. These guys get in here. Let us know. Hey, I'm here. That's it. Just let us know you're here.
Cool. So see folks signing in, and why don't we give it a moment. I see some client names in here that haven't been part of the weekly Q&A in the past. So while we're just giving folks time to sign in, Nick, why don't you just do your introduction for a moment, since folks don't necessarily know you, who are new to the group.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, if you see my name, and I don't know if you can see my name in Zoom, I don't know if participants see. But my name is Nick Peterson, and I'm sharing this in my group right now here. Primarily, what I do is I work with service providers, business owners, typically top of their industry, typically so smart that they have a really hard time articulating what they do, and spend a lot of time getting their message out. So I have right now 42 private. I have my own companies that all do relatively well, and I have 42 private clients, all in different industries. No two people do the same thing. So Dan was a private client. We've partnered on things now, but Dan was a private client, and I have no other accounting firm owners. And what that does is that allows me to use a concept that Dan and I believe Dan and I share, is that T-learning. What Dan calls T-learning is a preference of mine over I-learning, meaning I rather understand these concepts, these principles, and how they apply to multiple domains than dig really, really deep into one. And so we're here. We do this typically once a week, Dan and I, just office hours. And we talk a little bit about marketing, a little bit about sales, but mostly about decision-making and business strategy. Obviously, Dan is a brilliant finance wizard, wealth wizard. And what we're talking about is, and the reason we talk about marketing and sales is that's a component of your business. And what we're doing, and Dan is brilliant at this, especially with engineering these things in the business, want to make sure that every move you're making is getting you closer to the things that actually matter to you. And that starts on the very front end with how you market and sell. It's also why it's really, really important right now, because right now is the time where everybody's panicking that we may start making moves out of fear or scarcity or incomplete information that get us further away from the things that matter to us. And that's what Dan and I are always focused on. What are your priorities, and how do we make sure that every move we make has the highest probability of getting you closer to those priorities? So Dan agreed to do this every day for his clients, which is awesome. I keep saying an oasis of stability to make sure that, hey, look, let's not panic. This is what we see. This is how we make decisions. And today, maybe ongoing, but today he's also opened it up to some of my audience and my clients as well. So
Perfect.
We'll talk a little bit about how to get this every day if you're not one of Dan's clients. But that's me, and that's what I do.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. So we had a conversation over the weekend about just the uncertainty that's out there, and I felt like it was pressing enough that I should make myself available on a daily basis, at least Monday through Friday, to answer questions and hopefully share some thoughts and frameworks on how to kind of process all this stuff. I'm sitting in my office. I'm the only person in my office. We pulled the trigger on that 2.5 weeks ago or so, just applying our own principle of hedging downside risk. So we saw, unfortunately, that there was a death from the coronavirus in Seattle, and so when we saw that on Saturday a few weeks back, we kind of went through our principle of how do we hedge downside risk. And one of the most pressing or biggest risks that we saw was this possibility that we're going to ultimately find ourselves in a quarantine situation. And so we quickly, we've had the technology for years for everyone to work remotely, but pulled the trigger on that mostly so that we could work through any problems while we weren't in quarantine. And so in other words, while we weren't required to be in some sort of lockdown, let's work through it. So the whole Nth team, with the exception of me, has been working remotely for 2+ weeks, and it's been great. I feel comfortable coming into the office because I'm the only person in the office, and I still have enough paranoia to keep washing my hands and sanitizing everything as if other people were in the office. But just in case you guys are wondering, business as usual on the CPA firm side, except everyone's working remotely. With that, I want to share a few things that are going to be kind of the framework for future conversations. So if you haven't heard my equation up to this point, it's kind of the lead domino for the way that I process issues, which is financial anxiety equals financial uncertainty times financial powerlessness. So this idea of, there's a multiplying effect. So to the extent to which you've got uncertainty, and then in addition, you've got a sense of powerlessness, that they amplify themselves to create an increasing amount of anxiety. And so that just goes back to kind of the overarching issue that I've observed for years and years, which is that really the essential question that clients ask is not, can I pay the least amount in tax? Although they want that. It's not necessarily, I want more sales, although they want that. It all goes back to, am I going to be okay? Am I going to run out of money? And even more specifically, am I going to be able to fund the things that I care about, what I call profit priorities? Am I going to be able to fund those things in the timeline that I want? And that to me really is the kind of the essential question, and financial anxiety is kind of a subset of that. So ultimately, what we want to do is eliminate financial anxiety. The way that we do that is to drive down uncertainty and increase power. Let me know if that makes sense to folks that are out there. And so we've designed basically a set of tools to try to drive down the uncertainty, as well as get power over our finances. And the intention really is, from this toolkit, is it perfect? No. But by virtue of having a toolkit that you can go back to time and time again, results in consistent execution. So I talk a lot about how what we want to do is increase cash flow while driving down risk. And oftentimes what we see is that in order for folks to increase their cash flow, specifically in their business, but it could be true in their personal financial situation as well, is that they're taking on more risk, and in fact, a disproportionate amount of risk. So the risk level is increasing faster than the rate in which they're growing their cash flow. And that becomes problematic because it goes back to that financial anxiety issue. So anytime we introduce a new way of processing issues, anytime we pivot our business, anytime we just do something generally new, what we've done is introduce more risk into our business. And so ideally, we're consistently processing issues in the same manner, so that we're not introducing something new. Let me know if that makes sense. So with that, I want to talk again. These are some framing things for future conversations. Like I said, I'm going to be doing this daily, Monday through Friday, for at least the foreseeable future. But let's talk about biases for a moment. So I'm really a huge fan of the book Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman. and he talks about how really we can take our brain and divide it into these two systems: system one, system two. Mike says, great book. Yeah, it's definitely a commitment to get through it. But we've got system one and system two. System one is the kind of the fast processing. It's sort of the way that we're able to exist in the world. We're making, I don't recall the exact number, but it's thousands upon thousands of decisions each day. Do I move my hands? Do I look to the left? Do I look to the right? Do I cross the street? How do I make sure I don't run into somebody? These are all like these really fast decisions that we have to make, that we're not like consciously processing per se. And then there's system two, which is the more plotting part of the brain, running calculations, doing analysis, so on and so forth. And so that is the much slower part. And the challenge specifically with system one, though, is that for it to be this sort of fast processing system, as Daniel Kahneman points out, is that it's subject to biases. In order for you to make these quick decisions, it's got to kind of go to a set of assumptions. And so there's these biases that exist, and unfortunately, we can't just turn off system one. It exists, and so we can't necessarily just turn off these biases. Things like confirmation bias. You've got a specific perspective, and you're looking for data that really supports that conclusion. And if somebody points out from their perspective a fact that's contrary to yours, when confirmation bias is in play, actually what the data often shows is that it just makes you more resolute in your existing opinion. So someone pointing out the facts to you about the perspective isn't necessarily going to cause them to view things differently. It may in fact just cause them to be more entrenched and more confirmed in their perspective. So that's confirmation bias. Normalcy bias is another example of these biases that exist. We see that a lot right now, where a lot of folks are just trying to normalize the current situation and go, oh, we're going to be totally fine because I've always been fine. So we have all these biases that are out there, and that impacts our ability to really get control over the uncertainty and get control over the power that we need for our finances. Again, if you go back, because there's people who are signing in as I'm talking, if you go back to the equation, financial anxiety equals financial uncertainty times financial powerlessness, we're trying to find ways to increase certainty and increase power. So we need to be aware that these biases exist, and again, have a consistent system for how we process issues, in hopes that we are not so subject to the biases. Nick, did you have something that you wanted to say?
No, I'm just cruising. I'm just listening. Along with the biases, the one that sticks out that you brought up recently is, and I just see it everywhere, the fundamental attribution error, right? Like in mass, in that, like, oh, we did this thing, that is why this happened. A lot of that going on right now too.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with the fundamental attribution error, it's this, to kind of summarize it quickly, is that we have this tendency to assume that our approach was sound, and that we overemphasize personal characteristics of somebody else. So we overemphasize that person is, here's a good example. We assume that someone else is easily manipulated by the media because of some personal characteristics. But then we simultaneously assume that our intentions are good and sound. So that's an example of the fundamental attribution error. So these biases exist, and really it's just another data point for why we need a structure to be able to process issues that we consistently apply. And so let's talk about the first bucket, the uncertainty piece. And so we've got a fair amount of uncertainty about the state of the economy, and we've got a fair amount of maybe uncertainty about our business. and then we've got this overall level of uncertainty about just how is this coronavirus going to continue to scale out? What is that really going to look like? If you haven't seen our training that we did last week, where we did kind of a deep dive on kind of the data trends around coronavirus, and you want to get that, just hit me up with an email, and we'll share the video link with you. But I wanted to talk about again, as building blocks for future conversations, different types of data, and this is just my way of trying to simplify things. We've got kind of the objective data, things that are more measurements, findings. We've got subjective data, which is from your point of view. And then we have what I call phenomenological data, which is from your experience. And we need to be mindful of what type of data we're using to analyze scenarios and make projections about the future. So ideally, we're getting to objective data, things that are findings, measurements, not phenomenological data, which is I had this one experience. I saw a bunch of people out, and now I'm going to extrapolate out that people must be out everywhere by virtue of my specific experience. So when you're trying to analyze data sets and make conclusions, being aware of what type of data am I using in this circumstance, and trying to separate out that, is this just based off my experience that I'm extrapolating out to a broader picture? Is this based off my point of view, or do I actually have measurements, clear measurements, findings, facts? Nick, did you have something you wanted to say on that?
No, I just like the word phenomenological. See, it's a tough one.
It's one of my it is one of my favorite words. Top five favorite word for sure.
Yeah, I think it's important. Just everybody knows this, but again, biases and just being aware of it is, you go to the social media, right, and you see a lot of subjective and a lot of experience. I mean, even if it's like, hey, look, this grocery store doesn't have any toilet paper, right? Therefore, every grocery store has no toilet paper, and I need to freak everybody out on Facebook right now about it.
Right.
A lot of that.
The toilet paper thing is interesting to me on multiple levels. But in particular, the challenge with the toilet paper and like extrapolating that out as like a conclusion about things is that toilet paper just takes up a lot of space. So on the shelf. So in terms of the quantity of the number of like bundles of toilet paper in a given grocery store, it might be 50. Like if 50 customers came in to buy toilet paper, they would be out of toilet paper, just because of the volume and they don't carry a lot of back stock because it takes up a lot of space in the back. It takes up a lot of space on trucks, so on and so forth, because these rolls, same like with paper towels, right? So it's easy to extrapolate out. Like there were thousands of people who came in, because if the canned food aisle was empty, this volume size of cans like is substantial. I'm not downplaying the fact that people are going and buying a lot of toilet paper, but again, being aware that it takes up a lot of, like one package takes up a lot of space. So really 50 people or so buying toilet paper is probably going to result in them not having toilet paper. But maybe hundreds or thousands of people buying cans of soup would result in them being out of soup, right? So just looking at some of the comments about bidets. Yeah, no baked beans is code red. Yeah, for sure. The other thing to be aware of is, before I start getting into specific takeaways, is in the accounting world, we call it the 5 financial statement assertions, but I think it broadly applies to just generally looking at data and trying to analyze things. We've got, is the data accurate? Is it complete? So accuracy is, a bank statement says $1,000. Does the bank statement match with what you have in your books, as an example? We've got completeness. So how do we know that all the data is there? We have presentation, is it being presented in the same way every time? We have cutoff, which is it being reported in the right period of time? And then we have what's called existence or obligation, which is less applicable in this scenario, but is this data even relevant to be included? And so right now, when you look at the coronavirus data, it's hard to know which country is accurately reporting data. So is Iran actually reporting correctly the number of deaths? And then you have all the speculation about satellite images and them digging mass graves and all this sort of stuff. Like, is it actually accurate? I don't know. Is it complete? So has everyone been tested, and is all of that being included? Right now, we don't know. Presentation, are we presenting, just for example, serious or critical? Is every country, every jurisdiction presenting that in the same way? And so it creates a lot of noise in terms of being able to critically evaluate the data and draw specific conclusions about the future of things. So just being mindful of this stuff, I think is important to kind of be able to isolate the white noise from everything. And so we've got a lot of, as Sarah says, we don't have enough data. Yeah, it's largely anecdotal at this point, and it's trying to find what is going to be the data set that checks all of the boxes in terms of accurate, complete presentation, et cetera, and that we know is more objective. It's not subjective or phenomenological. And so trying to weed through all of that white noise sorts. So I can share with you my process, my methodology a bit. Nick and I have been watching these trends for a while, and have our own perspective, have our own projections. And in a really simplistic way, we've been using expected value calculations. So expected value is where you take each scenario. We think that, just as an example, that this is going to last for 6 weeks, this is going to last for 8 weeks, this is going to last for 12 weeks, and so on and so forth, and assigning a probability to each of those scenarios. And then the expected value would be taking each scenario times the probability, and then the sum of all that would be the expected value. And again, in our last week's video, we walked through that in an Excel spreadsheet. There are more, of course, much more robust ways of analyzing all this, but for simplicity's sake, for this audience, that's a starting point for analysis. So we've been running our own kind of trends and analysis and all of this. And there's some things that we generally know. We know that there's a doubling in roughly every 6 days or so. And so we see somewhere around 173,000 cases right now. But you have to somewhat isolate who has it under control versus who doesn't. And we don't necessarily know all this, but we've got a starting point, which is China, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. They all have, the number of reported cases are decreasing. And in fact, I think Taiwan hasn't had any new cases in quite a while. So my approach has been to back out those cases and isolate. So of the 173,000, there's about 90,000 that are related to China, Singapore, so on and so forth that I just listed out. So we got 90,000 or so across that, and then we're left with the remainder. And so to the extent to which we can assess how controlled this is if it's going to double every 6 days, and we've got 83,000 cases that are not related to China, et cetera, then 6 days from now, we can expect to see it go from 83,000 to 166,000. Now, again, we don't know the completeness of the data because of all the issues with testing and so on and so forth. And so to the extent to which, so in terms of the way that we're kind of analyzing things, or the way I'm analyzing things, it is looking at the doubling, isolating out China and others with the remaining countries to see the point in which the doubling rate slows. In other words, when does containment or some of these other social distancing things kick in and start to have a material impact. And what we've generally seen thus far is it seems that when countries get to around 5,000-6,000 cases, that's when they really ramp up the lockdowns and so on and so forth. So my back of the napkin has been that we'll have a better sense of where things are at in middle of April, and that more likely end of March is when we've got a lot more clarity about the way that all this is going to continue to impact things. So much better data clarity mid-April and near end of May, getting to more relative stability when you kind of extrapolate all this out. That's basically, I'm just giving you the high level, but that becomes the basis to some degree of what actions you're going to take. So we've got a whole series on how to do cash flow engineering, and we'll talk more about that in the coming days. But once you've got a sense of, how is this all going to play out in a way to kind of evaluate the data, then you can start to kind of isolate what's that going to mean to my business using our cash flow engineering approach, but also under the financial powerlessness side of things, using some principles for decision making, as well as evaluating the reserves that you have in your bank, and then lastly, understanding the rhythm of your business. So that's sort of the toolkit. I see we're coming right up on 11:30. So I want to see what questions people have. Like I said, today was more of a kind of laying some parameters and ways to think about this, and then we'll get more in the coming days into like the actual action steps and things to take. So what questions do people have? And I'll wait to see if anyone posts anything. Otherwise, I'll just share the question I'm getting from a lot of folks, which is, should I invest in the stock market right now? Should I be doubling? I'm getting a lot of, Dan, the market is down. Should I throw I've got some reserves. Should I throw a bunch of money into the market right now? And what would replace anxiety if you went the other way? Financial equals financial certainty times financial power. Can you explain the impact on rate cut and quantitative easing? Lots of good questions. And probably tomorrow, just looking at the time, we'll need to tackle those because those aren't necessarily short answers. Each one's probably a 10-minute or so discussion. So come back tomorrow and I'll answer those. In terms of the question about should I invest in the stock market, I'll just speak to that really quickly. So our framework is first we optimize and we maximize. That's one of our lead principles. Maximize is have the most today. Optimize is what are the priorities we have? What's the most efficient path forward to achieve that? Our next priorities, we're always hedging downside risk, and we're trying to increase our cash flow while reducing risk. So yeah, you may be able to time the market and jump in right now, but in a period where there is a substantial amount of uncertainty in your business, you're kind of doubling down on risk. So if you look at VIX, VIX, you search that VIX, and there's some polarizing perspectives on this whole VIX thing, but it's an index for volatility using the futures market. And VIX, when I checked it right before this call, is at 77. There have been prior to the most recent week or so, we've had the VIX index above 70 two other times. And historically, it's in the 20s-ish. Every once in a while, it'll jump up to the 40s. But it's basically, Mike says fear index. It's a measure of volatility And so we've got a massive spike in the VIX index, which basically is just an indicator that the market sees a lot of volatility, which we already know that. But if you have not funded your core capital is the amount of money that you need to be able to retire, and you don't have sufficient reserves in your business, the way that we recommend it around payroll, operating expenses, and then investment reserves, investing in trying to time the market and take some of your reserves, probably not the time to do that, because you're going to just be taking on additional uncertainty in a scenario where you have your business contracting and then also values dropping in these investments. This becomes a multiplier. So unless you've got your reserves fully funded, your core capital funded, or you're an expert in the market, probably not the time to try to get cute and time the market and jump in, because you're creating more risk, more uncertainty. So now you need to monitor the markets when that's not your area of expertise, in addition to trying to get a hold of all the downside risks that your business or your profession is facing. So hold off. That's really the message that I've been sharing with folks. So tomorrow I'm going to dig into more around cash flow engineering, and in particular, we've got a methodology for systematically engineering our cash flows, and an acronym: compile, analyze, strategize, execute. And part of that process, we talk about how do you get control over your committed revenues. And committed revenues would be essentially, what do we expect the next 12 months in terms of cash to come into the door? And we use this approach around either signed contracts or a preponderance of data to project out future committed revenues. And we need to take a different look at that given all the current volatility and uncertainty. So we're going to talk a bit about that tomorrow, and then I'll come back to the questions that folks asked that we're short on time to be able to answer. So thanks for tuning in. Hit me up via email, various Facebook pages, etc. If you've got questions. Otherwise, we'll be here trying to hopefully provide certainty to folks and provide a framework to kind of navigate as we move forward in the coming days.
Yep. So that's for Dan, for your clients. The emails, invites will go out every day, 5 days a week. If you are watching, maybe you're in the group right now, or you took the free invite and you want to get notified, maybe once a week, we'll do something like this for free, just to give people some certainty and some understanding. And if you want to get notified, you go to CFE class, like cash flow engineering, cfeclass.com/oasis. I just threw it together really quick, so I use the word oasis. And you'll get notified every time that Dan and I do this, probably once a week for the non-private clients.
Yeah. Well,
cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.